in my perfect world, if I had a big factory, I would have a countdown clock on the wall, but instead of the time, it would be the amount of uncommitted dollars the company has left. And so that way, everybody has the context to be responsible.
Probably the best thing about my career, from the Air Force to SpaceX to the rest of the startup world, is all of the interesting and amazing people I have gotten to meet along the way. And our guest today, Paul Keutelian, is certainly one of those people. When I first met Paul, he was the responsible engineer for the helium systems at the Vandenberg launch site for SpaceX. He then went on to do many other amazing things at SpaceX, and he's since gone to actually start 2 different nuclear startups. He's currently the CTO at Applied Atomics, where their goal is to power the next 1,000 years of advanced industry. I'm really excited for this conversation because he kind of exemplifies the person who I hope to be talking to with this podcast, to kind of bring light into the other side of engineering and tackling tough engineering problems that often doesn't get talked about. Before we get into that discussion, I do want to remind you that if this is your first time listening to the show, make sure you subscribe so you never miss a future episode. And if you are already subscribed, then I would humbly ask that you share this show with at least one other person, because that, after all, is how we grow. I can't tell you how much it means to me. So with that, let's get into the discussion with Paul Keutelian. Paul, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Matt. Very happy to be here. Very kind introduction, and I am hopeful that I'm able to share experiences that helps the audience, and just happy to be an open book and excited to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited for this conversation. I was so happy when you said yes to it. To get started, I'd love to start with where you're at right now and kind of what your team is trying to do. What are you trying to do at Applied Atomics?
Sure. So we are, like you said, trying to power the next 1,000 years of heavy industry. And the way we see it is the key enabler to being able to do things like desalinization, industrial power, AI data centers, all sorts of things is power. And that seems to be the gatekeeper to all of these things. So what we're trying to do is get to delivering power to our customers as quickly as we can and scale up as quickly as we can, leveraging our experiences from the past to get there.
Incredible. What do you think? Because I think we've had this conversation before. I mean, the nuclear industry has obviously gone through lots of periods of where everybody thinks it's going to be great, and then it takes a long time and everything's really expensive. What would you say for Applied Atomics right now? Like, what are the key things that you're trying to do differently so that it does happen fast?
Yeah. I mean, like you're saying, right now the iron's hot. And the way we think about it is there's the way to do it the most quickly is to start from your supply chain, to start from what exists today and work backwards, and start from your customers and work backwards. So the way I approached the team with this was we went out and we started talking to vendors from our past and some new folks new to us, that have worked in this space before, and gone around and asked, what do you make the most of, and what do you make today? And then given all those parts, coming back to the team and saying, what is the plant that we can build with this? And what we're hunting for is the Venn diagram between what we can build and what the market is willing to bear in terms of cost and time. And so when we started Applied Atomics, like Ben and I going through this exercise, where is there an overlap at all? And seeing one, that's the opportunity. And that's kind of how we've approached all the design points we've gotten to right now.
Oh, got it. So is it, if I'm hearing you correctly, tell me if this is right. The kind of the analogy that comes to my mind is how, the last decade in the space world, the big shift was, what if we use consumer electronics rather than like specialty electronics? Is it kind of that kind of thing, but going through the whole supply chain and finding like what's the nuclear equivalent of that?
that's a big part of it. The other part is focusing on the other part is focusing on limiting choices to what'll get us to the finish line in time.
Sure.
Right? So if our goal is to get to 2030, we can't make choices by
Got
design
it.
uh, that will take longer than that. So that pushes you into some pretty interesting spaces that I think engineers by default don't tend to go. We're
Yeah.
geared by default to say we're going to be cost optimal, and that we do that through thermodynamic optimization or neutronic optimization. And when you take this approach, you kind of shift off of those points.
Got it. So it's more the time optimization.
Yeah.
Interesting. Awesome. Well, I want to get into some of the non-engineering side of things, right? Like that's kind of the point of this discussion. Before we get to the explicit people leadership side of things, I wanted to start with kind of how I started the introduction to this idea of the responsible engineer. Because for those who aren't aware, like, and this is kind of me also kind of understanding this as a non-engineer, but from what I've read and picked up, the concept of a responsible engineer is something that's really changed, especially like the hard tech startup world, in the sense that if you go to many legacy companies, there's just a lot more distributed ownership of things. And one of the things that SpaceX and companies like it have done is introduce this role where no, like you are responsible for this entire system, from the design to the implementation, the whole thing. And that has allowed for much more ownership, much faster movement, much deeper understanding of the systems. And so let's first, let me pause there. Is that a right understanding of kind of what the responsible engineer role is? Like could you, what is it? How is it different from what's happened before?
Yeah, I think that's a great description of what the responsible engineer is. And then I think on top of it, you know, having the benefit of being part of launch or launch and test, or folks that actually work on the ground support equipment, is you really start to feel it kind of in your body. That like there's a way of life to the responsible engineer at work. And for us, it was kind of on overdrive because we were usually in the machines we designed. So it became a very personal, a personally driven desire to be responsible because, you know, it there's a lot of opportunity for impact to our personal lives if we're not responsible. But I think that it fosters a lot of really good ways of looking and thinking and appreciating the importance of responsibility, not only with respect to authority, but also with you know, responsibility to safety and execution, because you're letting your teammates down if you don't get it done or if it's not safe, and both of these things are important.
Yeah. The reason why I wanted to start with the idea of the responsible engineer is because I think in a lot of the corporate world, we're hearing a lot of this idea of kind of like leading without authority. More and more companies are becoming flatter and flatter. They're more interconnected than ever. And as a result, you can't just tell people to do things very often because they don't work for you. You're working with them. And I
Yeah.
think the responsibility, that role probably has a lot of that. So I'd love to kind of start to unpack, like, from your perspective, in that role or in those kinds of roles, what kind of people skills are really essential to being effective in those roles, and how did you see it?
Yeah, I that's a really interesting question, because I think the role of the responsible engineer in a flat structure kind of turns the whole paradigm on its head of,
Yeah.
you have this hierarchy, your boss is telling you what to do, it's your boss's call, and you're just doing the work. But now, because everybody's on a more even playing field, but people have the authority for their specific thing, they have ownership, you're almost managing the equipment more than you are managing people. Um, what that does is, the way I think of it is, you turn into almost a contractor within your own organization. And
Interesting.
when you when you take that approach, everybody becomes your customer, right? Your leader, your peers, the consumers of your product, even if it's internal to the company, and then externally, the actual client that's buying your company's product, your regulator, all that stuff. Everybody is your customer. And when you take that mindset, it really starts to become a more collaborative effort, because ultimately, having also been a consultant, what is our first thought? What is my customer's pain and how do I make it go away?
Yeah.
And so now it's not like, well, you have to get this done because we have to meet quarterlies and all this other stuff. It's like you're you're both working together because you're both consultants. You're both having to you have the same customer at some point and you're both trying to solve their issue.
Yeah, so I like that idea of it being because you can treat that to put that in the world of managers. Well, I think the best managers, the whole idea of servant leadership is this idea of, in many ways, as you said, you're treating your team really as your customers. You're a supplier to them. You're a supplier of resources. You're a supplier of authority. You're a supplier of direction. And so it's all about understanding their pain. I gotta believe though that there are still times where if everybody is kind of their own consultant within the organization, where you're competing for resources. You think this is the best way to solve the pain. They think this is the best way to solve the pain.
Oh yeah,
For you, how did you go about navigating those disagreements?
sure. Well, when those types of conflict when those types of conflicts come up, and they are frequent in this type of setup, I see it as an opportunity to refine an interface requirement, let me say, because I'd like to believe that if there are people on your team that are seeing different possible solutions and both of them could be equally right, then the problem isn't properly constrained, right? And that then becomes the role of the next higher person to add those constraints or to investigate and research it, because ultimately, in the perfect world, there's a solution that maybe one person would have done it a different way, but they don't disagree with the other person's solution, and that stems into an even deeper conversation. I think that in this age is an important one, is once you get to a certain level of product development or um, caliber of person you work with, I think stuff stops being right and wrong. It starts
Ooh.
being it starts being, am I the right solution for you? Are my teammates
Yes.
the right teammates for me? Are my customers the right customers for me? And am I the right vendor for them? And that kind of takes the ego and the person out of it. And you start working with people who are right for you, right? Is there a perfect bridge in the world? No. The San Francisco Bay Bridge was the right bridge for San Francisco.
Yeah. I love that. I think it really goes into this, speaking from the talent development world and the HR side of things. I think very often we can maybe we get overzealous about trying to say like we can solve problems when maybe we're not the right solution to a problem. And I think a lot of it comes from this fear that we're already often kind of on the side of the organization, and we're a support function. And so we're worried that if we're not solving every problem that we just, become irrelevant. And so we sometimes that leads us to say like, oh, we can do it, when we actually should be saying we shouldn't do it because it's not the right problem. But what you're saying really is this idea of imagining the world as there's infinite problems out there. And so we might as well find the right problems. How did you mentioned once you get to a certain point in your career, how did you get to that point where you were able to like remove that ego from it and really look at it? Is this the right solution?
Sure. The funny answer is I've been wrong a lot. And
Haven't we all?
haven't we all? And I've been wrong in a lot of fantastic ways. And I think the positive thing about SpaceX that I took away from that experience was SpaceX allowed us to be wrong without it being fatal.
Mm.
And both fatal to me personally and fatal to my career.
Yeah.
And there was a good leadership structure, there's a good culture there that people understood the risks that they were taking. And it comes back to responsible ownership, even at our leadership level, where they
Yeah.
knew and they were empowered to take a chance with us. We were responsible for convincing them, for providing that information, and they were responsible for taking the shot with us. And if we were wrong, we had to stand up for ourselves. We had to own that mistake. But they also acknowledged that risk, and it wasn't a surprise to them.
Mm.
And once you're in that type of system for a few years, and you're able to solve a bunch of really extreme problems, some of which may have no solution, um, you can really take that lens forward with you and take it out into the world. And that's one of the things I wanted to do. That's what drove me into entrepreneurship, is taking some of these
Yeah.
good pieces and expanding on them and creating more spaces like this, for people to also learn that being wrong is okay. As long
Yeah.
as the whole team is on board, we've talked about it, let's go do it. And then this idea stemmed from that.
I'm really interested in what you were talking about, and this could be, you can speak from the experiences that you saw at SpaceX, or kind of how you're taking that into since SpaceX, of how do you create that kind of environment? Because I really like how you hit that on the head of, even when the person on your team does something wrong, in a perfect world, like, you're doing it in partnership, like you empowered them to do certain things, so their mistake is your mistake too. And often that's not a relationship that I think is seen a lot in workplaces, where it is very separate, and so your mistake is your mistake, and I'm going to punish you for your mistake.
Sure.
How have you seen it where, one, that relationship gets built, or that kind of environment gets built, but then also mistakes aren't fatal, but enough mistakes probably are? Like what's the other side? Like, where's the
Sure.
limit to this?
Sure. Well, that's the job of leaders, right? Is to
Yeah.
manage how many bullets you have in the gun,
Mm,
and the amount of constraints you're going to put on the program and on your team, and how many of these shots you can take. I think something that's important for leaders to do, and I'm certainly trying to do myself, is to have my team in on it. Let them know this is this is what we have before it's over. Like, in my perfect world, if I had a big factory, I would have a countdown clock on the wall, but instead of the time, it would be the amount of uncommitted dollars the company has left.
yeah.
And so that way everybody has the context to be responsible. Because I know, having been, from the start of my career, sometimes the decisions and the constraints that came in didn't make sense to me because I didn't have context. And maybe the leaders couldn't tell me, maybe they didn't even know. But had I known what it was, and later on, as I became a senior engineer, when I started working on other programs and I started seeing even just a little bit more context, I understood, oh, okay, this is why you couldn't have given me this shot. It felt good to me, but the risk was just too high. And in context, I would have understood a little bit better and been more empathetic to this instead of being frustrated.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that you said that. I was actually just recently listening to interview with the CEO of, I think it was the CEO of Keutelian, the rocket
Yeah.
engine rocket engine company, and he was saying the exact same thing about how he tries to be as transparent as possible with the team about their burn rate, about the amount of money that they have. And I think the underlying thing that I getting from what you're saying is, it's funny. So later on this year, I have a book coming out called Minimum Viable Manager, and I am already like thinking about what's the opposite side of this book that would be called like Maximum Viable Leader. Like, what's like the extreme end of how do you go for the biggest bets and the biggest things, but not getting out of control.
Yeah.
And one of the ideas that I've been thinking there is setting this big, bold vision that's grounded in reality. Like you have to be able to trace a really clear line to it. And so, and the way this relates to what I'm hearing you say right now is often when we think about how many chances we're going to give somebody, how many mistakes they're going to make, it's just like, oh, I don't know. I as the manager, I'm just tired of working with them. I'm just frustrated. I just think they're not the right fit or whatever. But kind of what I'm picking up for you is almost like you as the leader know where you are trying to get and the amount of resources, whether that's money or time that you have. In a perfect world, I have infinite money and time, and I can give you infinite chances to get better. And we can just learn and learn and learn, and you can get better along the way. But that's not real. There is some end point, whether it's time, money, whatever. And you as the leader, knowing that, or like looking at your team and kind of figuring out like, are we on a glide path to get there or not? And you're making mistakes at a rate which we can't absorb. Like we're no longer on, and so it's just a much more grounded way of thinking about, is it, can I keep working with this person or do I need to try a different direction?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that also, I'd like to believe that that conversation is easier to have with the team. And having been on the other side of that, like I would like to believe that I would take that conversation with grace, where it's like it's not an interpersonal issue. It's
Yeah.
exactly what you said. How many shots can we absorb? Did I do my best as a leader? My responsibility was to make sure that you had all the tools you had to succeed, and for me to understand what it was that you were trying to do and make
Yeah.
sure it fits in the company. And then, yeah, coming back and saying, hey, this, being transparent so it's not sudden too, and saying,
Yeah.
look, you've had a lot of shots at base, you're out. But instead saying like, okay, this is the chance you're taking, this is the risk to you, and it's not
Yeah.
personal. It's,
Yeah.
this is a big shot. How
Yeah.
much are you willing to bet on it? And in the past, in my past experience, more for physical safety perspective, boy, have I seen the quality of work shoot up when it's your own safety on the line,
Sure.
both in myself and in folks that I've trained and in my peers. And this is a good thing, right? If it's
Sure.
different if you're designing a machine for somebody else to operate, it's way
Yeah.
different when you're designing a machine for you to operate.
Yeah.
And why shouldn't work be the same?
Yeah. I mean, I remember explicitly when that speech was made at SpaceX lead up to the Crew Dragon launch. And it was just kind of, if you weren't comfortable putting your family on this craft, then we shouldn't be launching this craft. Like we need to like really, really think it through.
Yeah.
What, so now that you're on you mentioned kind of the clock on the board, whether it's time, whether it's money. Now that you're out on your own and you've been at a couple companies now, what are some other things you think about trying to create an environment where there is that ownership, where there is that transparency?
Yeah. I think a lot about interface controls and interface management. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to have a responsible engineer, or if you're going to have responsible folks, you need to know where your sandbox is. So I'll use a direct example. I, as the CTO, am responsible for the product development of the company. I report to the board, and I am a surrogate for our customer within the company. And my job beneath me are 4 pillars: regulatory, engineering, deployment, and controls. And so my job is to develop a product that sets the rules of engagement between these 4 disciplines, and some consistency around reliability and redundancy, the process by which design will happen, and some constraints, some performance constraints. And then after that, it's up to the team to provide solutions that fit in this framework, because the purpose of me setting those boundaries is to create a common communication layer between these disciplines.
Mm.
And then that's it. And then I kind of have to let go the ownership of it. I can of course dip in and say, hey, I don't know, or this is my thoughts on this based on my experience as an engineer here, but I really do leave the ultimate authority of that decision making to that team member, even as the CTO. Now it eventually comes
Mhm.
back up to me and I have to make the call on it, right? But those same rules of justification that I've asked the team in when they talk to each other, they talk to me, I also enforce on myself. I have to convince my team that even if they might not think this is the perfect way to do it, they have to at least, it has to at least make sense to them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
culture comes from the top. I'm a firm believer in that. And so I get what my team gets.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, and this idea of having a common language and kind of knowing where the boundaries of the sandbox are is really essential. It reminds me of there's a framework called EOS, the Entrepreneur Operating System,
Okay.
that I really like. It comes from a book called Traction, and one of the things that they have in that book is this concept of an accountability chart as opposed to an org chart, because very often, especially in startups as they grow, like an org chart kind of tends to grow very much based on personality. It's who's there at the time, it's who has some spare capacity to bring on some people, and it's why really easy, especially early in a company's growth, it can just lead to this hodgepodge where you're not really sure who's responsible for what or where or why they're responsible for it. And so the idea of an accountability chart is pretend there's nobody in the organization, nobody exists. What are the big picture things, the big picture responsibilities that people need to be held accountable for? And you break those. And so you're going to wind up with like 7 or 8 things at the top, and then there's some sub things to those and some things to those. And then you look around at the people in your organization and you say, okay, who's best to be responsible for accountable for each one of those things? And it's just a really grounded way of thinking through like where are those interfaces, so that everybody understands them. Because I think in a lot of organizations people don't.
I mean, I completely agree. And I think we may have accidentally stumbled into that type of situation because a concept that I've been interested in, and I know some companies do, I know some larger companies have done this, is they separate engineering leadership from people leadership. They're different
Mm-hmm.
people. And
Yes.
and I think that's extremely fair. That's very interesting to me because I think some people are better leaders. I think some people I shouldn't I think some people are better led by certain people than other people, and that it's better to decouple that from forcing both your top engineers, your top technical talent from being your top leaders. I know some exceptional engineers that have no interest in leadership, and I know some exceptional technical leaders that are like individual like tinkering and engineering just isn't their thing.
Yeah.
And like let's leverage that. I think it's not tenable to compel top technical and top leadership to have the capabilities of the other side.
Yeah, the split promotion track, dual promotion track, I think is just like an essential element of any technical organizations these days, where you need to have a career path to advance as a pure technical contributor that does not involve people leadership. Like
Yeah.
it's just an essential thing.
Yeah. We've already started those conversations too. Like that's where we started with is
Yeah,
how do we make this system work?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Same
yeah,
with product ownership. Yeah.
yeah. Any other, as especially as you've been out in your in building a couple different companies now, any other big things that have appeared, like biggest challenges that have occurred to you or you've come across because you become more responsible for the people side of things? Yeah, and any big challenges that have stood up for you, and how have you gotten past those?
Yeah. I think some of the biggest challenges have been convincing people that discipline is speed, and that when you have startups don't need to be a frenzied mess. There's I almost kind of wanted to call it like a game that's being played where there is some benefit to having a sandbox where people are just able to go build and create and envision and dream and all that. And then there's a point where you've got to get into production as fast as possible. And at that point, that takes a lot of discipline. And I have seen and experienced situations where having discipline from the get-go gives you the freedom to explore, to experiment, to have that creativity. And I think that a lot of folks feel like that's impossible. Like I think publicly, the public perception is you need to have just this frenetic activity to make stuff happen. And so I think there's not a lot of appeal to try this path because there's a lot of upfront work that you have to do as leaders that's not exciting.
Yeah.
But I want to take people and say, I promise it's smoother on the other side. And yeah.
It's funny. I don't know if you know this. There's a ex-Navy SEAL, Jocko Willink, who actually has a book called "Discipline Equals Freedom," and so it's exactly this idea. What is when you mention there, like you have to make some tough choices early on? What do you mean? Like, what are some examples of that?
Sure. I mean, you have to focus on like your communications interface for the company. What does that look like? What is that mechanically? That's your quality program, and that's your hiring team. I'm a firm believer that hiring is the number one most important function that a company has.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. Because I'm trying to make the 1990s championship Bulls, right? And all those players are phenomenal, and they were phenomenal separate, but together, it's a force multiplier. And that brings me back to, the concept of, for what we're trying to do, for the leaders that we are, for the experience that we have, there are people who are right for us and that we are right for. And that's the team we're trying to build. And it's not a judgment on, we only have the top 2% of engineers, or we have the best this or the ultimate that. It's, as a unit, however we are, we're right for somebody. And hopefully that's a lot of people and enough to make a good business.
But, and that's where the challenge is, because in order to do that correctly, in order to hire well, it is, okay, let's like really define this job rec. Let's really know who we are, what skills we do have, what skills we don't have. It's like, it's taking that upfront time to really closely define that. So then the recruiters can go wild within those constraints, and they have the freedom to find somebody who is the non-intuitive pick, who didn't come from the college, who didn't have this background, but given these constraints is truly the right person for you. And that's where it all comes from.
Yeah. And it's months. And sure, I'm an engineer. I'm the CTO. Nothing would make me happier than to be coding away and doing simulations and building stuff. But it's not right for my team. And I am a steward to them. And I'm a steward of their time. And we're trying to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And all of us are Michelangelos. And I got to make sure only Michelangelos come in. And that's,
how do you define that? And just, I mean, it really, and everything you just said right there, I think really brings the conversation full circle is it's you seeing your team as your customer. It's what do I need to provide them to make sure they have the resources, that we're bringing in the right people to support them. But it's really viewing yourself as a leader, as the people who you're leading as your customers. I like that. Awesome. Well, this has been a fantastic discussion, Paul. I think we could go for a lot longer. I'm really excited to hear what you're doing. The nuclear space is such a hot space right now. So best of luck to you and the team. We'll definitely have to keep in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you kindly. And we're excited for some announcements hopefully coming out soon, and to bring people along on our progress to 2030.
Awesome. I look forward to it.
Thank you so much for listening in on the conversation. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. If you are a manager yourself and you're looking for more insight onto how to better lead your team, please make sure to check out some of our other amazing episodes. If you are responsible for developing leaders in your organization and you're struggling to make programs that actually change behavior and actually impact the business, please reach out so we can figure out how to make your organization better every day. Drop me a line using matt@bettereverydaystudios.com. I look forward to the conversation.